After Charlie Kirk's assassination, we have to confront the reality of political assassination. We have to realize that political assassination always backfires on the faction that commits it. All throughout history, whenever someone has assassinated someone that they don't like, someone they consider their political enemy, in order to silence him, that only ever makes his voice louder. Posthumously, his voice is carried on by his followers, by his adherents, even by people who, previous to his assassination, may not have liked him and may have actually hated him. After a man is assassinated, he gains a new respect and a new sympathy that wasn't there before. If you assassinate a man in order to silence him, it's only going to amplify his words. It's only going to extend his message, the significance of it, and the longevity of it. It's not going to help your group, your side of the argument. It's not going to silence those that you disagree with. On the contrary, it's just going to make them louder. If you really hate someone and really don't want them to continue saying things or you don't want their message to continue to be spread, if you consider them evil and you don't want someone to keep speaking, then the worst thing you could do, the stupidest thing, the most short-sighted thing you could do is to kill them. If you kill them, then that's going to give them an air of sympathy. It's going to make them, even if it doesn't go all the way to making someone a martyr, it is going to extend their appeal. It's going to make people feel sympathy for them. It's going to make people who maybe you never heard of someone who was assassinated. Maybe they've never heard their message before, but going forward, people are going to be curious about it, and they're going to seek out this man's words. They're going to seek out the message. They're going to see what it was that got someone so angry as to assassinate him. And so it's going to backfire. It always backfires. Give me an example of a time, at least in the last 500 years, that someone was assassinated for political reasons, and the goal of that assassination was actually carried through. Like this person, the speaker, this activist, this politician, whatever, give me an example of a time when someone was actually successfully silenced by an assassination, and it didn't just end up making them more popular. I don't think there has been an example. The only situation in which maybe that would work is one in which it was someone who had so little of an audience that it didn't, people eventually forgot that it didn't make enough of an impact when he was killed that as to draw additional attention to his message, to his cause. But anyone who has a decent following, anyone who has a lot of eyes and ears on him, anyone who has a passionate base of support, the worst possible thing you could do is to assassinate him. And I think anyone who isn't a fool, anyone who isn't, at the very least, enormously short-sighted, realizes this. I think whoever assassinated Charlie Kirk must have been. Well, I suppose they did arrest a suspect now, and he is 22 years old, if I remember correctly. And 22, it's entirely possible that he is just very clueless because of his youth. That could be. 22 is fairly young, and I think we all lacked a complete understanding of things when we were 22. I think, even if we were ahead of the curve in some ways, I think we were at or behind the curve in others, and we all learn, and at that age it could be the ignorance of youth. It could be the fervor of youth, and it could be the ignorance of youth that led him to believe that by assassinating a man during one of his events, well, a crowd of people was gathered, mostly in support, and it was being filmed, it was being broadcast, and the eyes of thousands of people at that moment were fixed on him. It could be ignorance. It could be simple ignorance and the sort of clueless naivete of youth, and it could be what caused it. But it's also possible that this person, if indeed he is the guilty party, and it sounds likely that he is. The evidence they've gathered certainly makes it seem like he is guilty, but I guess we will find out one way or another as time goes on. But if he is the guilty party, then I think he may have just been a political fool, which is ironic because a lot of the people who would commit an assassination, a political assassination, or support it, suggest it, dream of it, whatever, a lot of these people they would consider themselves very well politically educated. They would consider themselves fully politically educated and geniuses in the field of politics and the political repercussions of an action. But in reality, then they do things like this, and that just shows that they clearly have no idea what they're talking about. If you think assassinating your political enemy, and especially a popular enemy, one who has a very large fan base and a lot of supporters, and one who has a large media presence, especially someone like that, the idea that silencing someone like that through violence is going to help your cause rather than blow up on it and backfire on it tremendously, that's very, very silly. It's very foolish. Perhaps even this person, whoever the assassin is, perhaps the assassin is just stupid. Perhaps the assassin just is not intelligent enough to put these things together and realize that this was not the move to make if you wanted to silence Charlie Kirk. If you wanted to silence him. Because, well, for example, take myself. I don't think prior to this assassination, prior to hearing the news, I don't think that I had seen any of his videos. I don't think I had watched him. I had seen similar commentators, people who did similar kinds of debates on college campuses and that kind of thing. Like I've seen Steven Crowder and who's Ben Knowles and Ben Shapiro and people like that. I've seen similar political commentators, but I don't think I had ever seen Charlie Kirk. But after this assassination, I went out and I watched some of his videos, and now I have seen them. Now I have a better idea of who he is and what his political stance is and what he was arguing for and against, and I may not have seen him if he had not been assassinated, because, I mean, obviously, it's a terrible thing, just purely from a pragmatic standpoint of looking at getting your message out. I mean, becoming a martyr is, and then, most people don't want to become martyrs, even if they deeply believe in their cause. Some do throughout history. I mean, there have been plenty of people who have yearned to be martyrs and who have set out with that goal in mind, but most people don't want to be martyrs. I'm sure Charlie Kirk did not want to be a martyr. I'm sure he wanted to live. He did not set out to be murdered in cold blood for his political views, but just looking at it purely pragmatically, if you become a martyr, I mean, the upside of that tragedy is that is perhaps the single strongest fuel you could give your movement. Becoming a martyr, as long as there are other people in that same movement who are willing and able to carry it forward in your absence, then becoming a martyr that's going to give your movement the strongest possible push. And that's going to be what drives it on better than, and again, it's a tragedy. Obviously, that shouldn't happen to anyone. But throughout history, a lot of the most powerful, potent causes and movements have been led at one point by someone who was martyred, who was killed out of loyalty to his or her beliefs, and they were martyred, and that gave their cause, their followers, an immense boost, and it provided the ideal rallying point to carry that message forward into the future. Anyone who thinks that the solution to political disagreement is murdering your opponents, or even just trying to intimidate them through violence, really any kind of trying to forcibly silence your opponents, rarely works throughout the history of human political struggle. Rarely. Even in extremely repressive regimes where dissent was crushed, and not always through murder, not all the time, but not always through murder, not sometimes lesser forms of intimidation, and sometimes in rather subtle ways, like East Germany. East Germany tried a sort of soft dictatorship approach where they wouldn't be as blatant about their political repression. They would try to, on the surface, seem as though they weren't crushing their dissidents. They weren't being an authoritarian, repressive state. Of course, obviously they were in reality, and everyone knew it. But their approach was to try to have a certain degree of plausible deniability in terms of repressing dissent. They wanted to be able to say, oh look, there's no evidence of us crushing dissent. There's no evidence of us doing this, and and sort of gain a degree of plausible deniability, of a way to brush off accusations, and in a way sort of gaslight their dissidents, in the sense that they could say, oh, no one's oppressing you, no one's repressing your beliefs. Oh look, there's no official policy of arresting political dissidents. There's no official policy of extreme censorship. There's no official policy of murdering enemies within our own state. But of course they did that, and it's not like they did a great job of hiding it. Everyone knew. Who wasn't a fool? Everyone knew that that's what they did. But even in a situation like that, where you don't necessarily go full bore totalitarian openly and just crush all resistance and kill anyone who speaks out against you, even in situations like that, even in situations where the regime tries to play nice and tries to act like they're reasonable and they allow dissent, and even in situations like that, it doesn't work. If you try to crush dissent, it almost always blows up in your face. It almost always it encourages further dissent. The more you try to snuff out a movement, the stronger it's going to get. Even theoretically, even in a situation where maybe it wasn't a great movement, and I'm not talking about anything in particular, I'm just speaking broadly, but in a situation where, you could have a questionable movement that maybe wasn't supported by the entire population or even a majority of the population, but if you try to smother it, if you use this is the government, if the regime tries to squash that movement, tries to make things difficult for them in a way that's perceived to be unfair, then it's going to make people sympathetic to that movement, and it's going to make them look like the underdogs. It's going to make them look like the victims, and people like underdogs and they like the victims. They like supporting people and movements who are perceived to be being held down unfairly. They like supporting people and movements who seem like the resistance to a harsh, oppressive order. And of course, there's, not always are such movements genuinely good or heroic or anything like that. I mean, any regime is going to be called oppressive and brutal oppressive regime by someone's going to have a problem with every regime, and there's always going to be lots of dissidents. But that's also another reason to you just sort of, even if you really want social order at any cost, you kind of have to allow dissidents. You just kind of have to allow people to, within reason. I mean, obviously, if people are rioting and just causing social chaos, and that's different. But within reason, you have to allow civil discourse, and you have to allow people to voice their complaints, because if you don't, it's just going to ironically make their complaints louder and more audible. It's going to make people more aware of them if you try to prevent them from speaking. And this is an extreme example of that with Charlie Kirk's assassination. It's an extreme example of trying to silence someone because you don't like what he says. And there are a lot of people who make excuses, and they say, he brought this on himself, this was his fault, he deserved it, nonsense like that. Obviously, these are completely hypocritical nonsense arguments. But if you don't allow someone to speak, even if you hate them, even if you think they are reprehensible, then just pragmatically speaking, you're going to hurt your own position. You're going to hurt your own cause, your own movement, whatever it may be. You're going to suffer. You as the assassin, as the censor, as the person trying to silence your political enemies, you're going to feel the effects of that even more than the people you try to silence. It's going to blow back in your face, and whatever damage you hope to do to the enemy, it's going to happen tenfold to you and your movement. There are a lot of people whose arguments I find reprehensible. But it would be completely wrong for me to try to, this is morally speaking now, that was the pragmatic side of it, and now I'd like to talk about the ethics of it, and what, the people saying that, the people who think they are the good guys, the people who think that they are, they're the heroic, underdog. Like they think they're the underdogs. They think they're the resistance to evil. They think they are justified in killing their enemies, their political enemies. They think that mere opposition to what they consider absolute good they think that just by opposing what they consider evil, it makes them absolutely good, and therefore anything they do good and justified. No matter how evil in and of itself that action is, like murdering your political enemies. These people, and there are a disturbing number of them, at least people who voice these ideas. I mean, who knows to what extent a lot of these people are being honest. I mean, they might just be saying this. If you gave them the power to actually do something like this, I mean, whether they would actually see it through, who knows? Hopefully most of them wouldn't. Hopefully most of them are just being provocative. Most of them are just being angry, and they're just kind of voicing their impotence, their impotent fury. And hopefully they don't actually really believe most of these things. If you think it's okay, if anyone out there thinks that they are so good and so righteous that anything they do to another person who they consider evil is justified, I mean, really think about, how can you possibly be the good person in that situation? How can you possibly be the morally justified one if you are seeking to justify acts that are inherently unjustifiable? Because you're saying that it's okay to assassinate this person because he is evil, or however you want to phrase it. But basically, he is so reprehensible that it justifies extreme violence against him in order to silence him. How would that be different if someone else from the other side used that same logic against you? Because obviously almost everyone thinks that they're the good guys. Almost everyone thinks that they are the heroes and they are the righteous party. Almost everyone thinks that the other side is wrong and I'm right, and that, at best everyone else is just mistaken and they just don't know as well as I do. That's what, I mean, just fundamentally, just inherently, that's sort of the human default position, is that we think, and I'm not saying everyone, consciously thinks this, but most people think that they are good and their enemies are bad. And so if we open that can of worms and we say that anything done against evil is evil, if anything done against evil is good and righteous, that's what I meant to say, then first of all, how would you defend yourself against someone from the other side saying that same thing about you? Because I would say that a lot of the people on the political left, I'm not saying everyone, but a lot of the people on the political left who would support murdering Charlie Kirk, I would say that they, broadly speaking, I'm not saying everyone, but I mean, probably 80% of that group does not believe in objective morality. They probably don't believe in God. They probably don't believe that there is such a thing as genuine objective morality. And I could be wrong, but I think that is a fair assessment, just broadly speaking. And I'm sure there are plenty of people who don't fit into that mold. I'm not saying everyone is like that, but I would say a strong majority of the people who celebrate his death, who celebrate Charlie Kirk's death, are probably moral relativists who think that ultimately there is no universal good. They probably think there is no absolute right and wrong. That it varies and depends, and it's ultimately a matter of opinion. And I would wager that that's probably what most of them believe. And so then, I mean, by that logic, wouldn't people on the other side, wouldn't people on the right, the people they dislike, wouldn't they be just as entitled to use that kind of moral argument, that if you consider someone evil, then it's okay to murder them in cold blood? Wouldn't people on the right be just as entitled to use that same argument on people from the left? Wouldn't it be, I mean, who's to say which side is absolutely good and which side is evil in that situation, assuming you don't believe in some kind of absolute good, assuming you don't believe in some sort of universal truth, some kind of universal good. If you don't believe in universal good or evil, then I think the only reasonable thing is to conclude that you can't, if you claim to be good and therefore entitled to commit evil acts against people you consider evil, then you would have to open yourself up to that same argument from the other side, wouldn't you? I mean, at least the other side, at least the right wing, and again, this is just me speaking broadly, but at least they generally do believe in some kind of absolute good and evil. I mean, they more so than the political left, I think. I think that's pretty reasonable to say, is that broadly speaking, the right is going to be more inclined to think that there is an absolute good and evil. I mean, if you had some kind of if you had some equivalent extremist on the right who believed that everyone he was opposed to was literally controlled by demons or something, at least his position would, I mean, I don't agree with that position at all, and objectively speaking, it doesn't make sense. It's not a logical argument, but from his point of view, it would have a greater claim to legitimacy than the stance of someone on the extreme left who doesn't believe in God, doesn't believe in demons, doesn't believe in absolute good or evil, and yet wants to use that same kind of logic of, oh, well, the people I'm fighting are Nazis or whatever, however you want to, fascists, however you want to describe it. And so whatever I do to them is justified. I mean, how would you, but you can't, and they mean it in the same kind of way as, oh, this person is evil, this person is controlled by demons or whatever, and so whatever I do is justified. But if you go down that road, if you claim that your enemies are evil, but you don't believe in evil, if you claim you're good, but you don't ultimately believe in good, then the only thing left is trying to make it logically make sense in an ethical way. You can't claim, you can't claim to be divinely good. You can't claim your enemies are infernally evil or something. You can't claim that it's a supernatural thing. You have to rest your case on just on a well-structured logical argument. I mean, or I suppose just not use any argument and just say whatever kind of violence I use is justified. But I don't think that's going to convince most people, even on your own side. And so the people who think that any violence against those they hate and those they consider evil is justified by virtue of them supposedly being evil, well, don't you think that you're ultimately the same as the people who you claim to oppose? How are you different? If you think like your enemy and you act like your enemy and you use the same tactics and arguments as your enemy, then what makes you different? What makes you better? And if the answer is nothing, then don't you have to reconsider what you're doing and what you're fighting for and how you're fighting? And shouldn't that raise some questions? Shouldn't people think, when they go down that road of using those arguments, shouldn't they think about the repercussions of it, about the contradictions, about the hypocrisy of that kind of argument? Shouldn't it spark some kind of introspection, and shouldn't it trigger some kind of alarm about, like, oh wait, aren't I blatantly contradicting myself? Aren't I just doing the very thing that I claim to be so horrible? Aren't I just embodying the very things that I claim to hate and I claim to oppose and I claim to be evil? And if that doesn't happen, then I have to wonder about the people who make these arguments, the people who don't think about that. I mean, is it that they are so indoctrinated by the extremity of their beliefs, or is it that they are so blinded by rage that they don't think of these things? Or, and I don't say this to be cruel, I don't mean this in a cruel way, are they so stupid that they just don't, it doesn't even register? Like they can't think about these contradictions. They are unable to see the contradictions because they just don't have the intelligence to see them. I don't know. I think even when I was young and I had a lot of contradicting beliefs, and I'm not saying my beliefs are contradiction free today or anything like that. I mean, no one's beliefs are ever completely contradiction free. We just have to do our best to remove the contradictions and smooth it out and make it as consistent and hypocritical to the least degree as we can. But when I was young and I had a mess of contradicting beliefs, and I do think, and it certainly took the wisdom of other people to help me see these. I also think I noticed the contradictions in my beliefs as I encountered them, for the most part. And I don't say that to, in a prideful way. I'm just saying that in a honest way. I believe that I am pretty good at spotting my own contradictions and my own hypocrisies, and I very earnestly and honestly try to overcome them and try to fix my beliefs and my behavior when they are not consistent with what I profess, with what I consciously believe. I try to smooth out the inconsistencies between my actions and what I consciously believe. So then how do some of these people, like this the accused assassin, I know that he is young, 22 is young. I think I really started really realizing how contradictory and screwed up a lot of my political and moral beliefs were around 22 or 23. Like definitely 23. Definitely 23 is when I really turned my life around. I think I sort of started the process when I was 22, and then 23 is when I really turned things around and fixed my life after I'd screwed it up really terribly. Or started the long process of fixing my life. It's, it's an ongoing thing. In some ways I feel like I still am trying to put myself back together after having broken myself that badly. And so perhaps this accused assassin, if he is indeed guilty, perhaps he is, maybe it's just a tragedy and he is just young and he did something really terrible and tragic, made a tragic mistake before. Like maybe he would have realized, if he had just been a little older, maybe that would have been enough time. Maybe he would have realized that he didn't need to do that. Maybe he would have recognized some of these contradictions in his beliefs if he had just been a little older. But also maybe not. As disappointing and disheartening as it is, I do see a lot of old people who just are bafflingly oblivious and just act like, they act like they never progressed beyond their teenage years. They never grew beyond their teenage self. At least that's how it looks from the outside. How can I truly know what's going on inside another person's mind or heart? I don't claim to truly know. But what I am able to observe suggests that some of these people just never mature, and they have the most insane, from my perspective, the most insane childish beliefs that you would think they would have noticed at some point. You would think that at some point, even if they weren't necessarily the most intelligent people, just at a baseline, you would think that they would at some point wise up and notice some of these contradictions. But they apparently don't. And it's sad. It's frustrating because, optimistically, I like to think, I try to see things positively. I don't entirely know whether I'm naturally pessimistic or optimistic. I think it depends on the day and the situation, but I think I'm a mixture. But, optimistically, I want to think the best of people. I want to think that even if we make mistakes, and even if we believe really terrible things at one point in our lives, even if we were morally desolate at one point, as I consider myself to have been. I think I was morally desolate at one point when I was young, from my late teens, mid-teens until early 20s, something like that. I like to think that even if we fall down as far as we can and we make the worst mistakes we can, I like to think that we are capable of recognizing that I like to think that everyone has the capacity to recognize when they've made terrible mistakes and they've been immoral or amoral, and I like to think that everyone at least has the capacity to recognize that and change for the better. And I do think that most people do. And I don't think that it could be entirely a matter, I'm not going to qualify that. I don't think it could be a matter of intelligence. I know earlier I was wondering, is this accused assassin not intelligent enough to see the contradictions in what he what he believes and what he does. And I think that might be part of it. I mean, I think if someone is more intelligent, I think that helps. I think that helps them kind of see things, contradictions in their actions and their beliefs and what have you more quickly. But I don't think that it is not, I believe that it is not about intelligence, because there are a lot of people who, and I'm not trying to sound condescending or anything, not in any way, because I actually, this is the thing I respect the most, but there are a lot of people who may not be the most intelligent people, they might not even be intelligent at all, but they are very moral, very good people. And that is ultimately the most respectable, admirable, laudable thing in a human being. That's what I believe. I believe that the being genuinely good, genuinely compassionate, genuinely kind, genuinely trying to do the right thing, even if we don't always succeed, even if we, even if we've made terrible mistakes and we're trying to make up for them. Being a good person, trying to do the right thing, not necessarily succeeding, but just trying to do the right thing. That is what I respect the most. I mean, there are people who I respect a great deal more than myself, and it's because they, I think, are ultimately, they are ultimately more moral than I am. Unfortunately, a lot of these people have died tragically, but they were much more, they were ethically superior to myself. I consider, because I consider them to be paragons of goodness, and that's what matters. It's not intelligence. It's not, intelligence and accomplishment and things like that are great. They are worthy of admiration. They are laudable, and they should be praised. And I'm not saying these things are irrelevant, because that would be really stupid of me. But I'm saying that, I guess it's, maybe a comparison would be like if there was a group of people and, a lot of them were wearing really fancy clothes and jewelry, and they were like very finely dressed. But they had, they were rife with terrible diseases, and they were dying. And then there were people who were dressed very badly, and, they just like had, scraps. They were wearing rags, but they were healthy. I mean, I think, it's like, okay, one might be outwardly really, like on the surface, and be like really good, really respectable. People might say, oh, that's wonderful, you're finely dressed, those are really nice clothes and jewelry. But if the person wearing them is dying, then that's much less important than just being healthy. Like, the people who are healthy, the people who are moral, the people who try to do the right thing, they're the healthy ones. And the people who just rest on the laurels of their of their intelligence, of their education, of their accomplishments, their material accomplishments in life, things that ultimately are not as important as whether you are a good person at your core, or whether you try. Because I think trying to be a good person is I think that's what it means to be a good person. I mean, we're all bad sometimes. We're all, some of us more than other. I would consider myself bad more than most people. I want to make that clear, that I'm not, I am judging myself more harshly than I judge other people. I think we should all do that. I think we should all be our harshest critic. I think we should all judge ourselves, perhaps not by a higher standard than we judge others, but we should judge ourselves more completely than others, because we know what's going on inside our own minds. We know whether, we deep down, we try to kid ourselves, but we know whether we are doing something we shouldn't. We know whether we're making excuses for our own bad behavior, and we can't, we can sometimes know that about other people, but we can't ever be 100% sure about another person, or at least not unless we, I guess, have a great deal of physical evidence about what they've been doing. But just in our day-to-day lives, like, we may think this person is bad. We might think this person is making excuses. We might think this person is full of crap, but we rarely just, the people we know in our day-to-day lives, we can rarely be totally sure of that. Like, we shouldn't presume to really know what's going on inside someone else's heart most of the time. I mean, obviously sometimes people are so, like a serial killer who is just, we have reams and reams of evidence of how, of what was going on in his or her head, and we like, obviously that's different. I mean, I think it's reasonable to say, okay, no, that's terrible. Like, to not give someone like that in these certain extreme situations, not give them the benefit of, of the doubt. I think that's fair. But yeah, so I think what I was originally saying, I sort of went off on a tangent, but what I was originally saying was, I think that it's not about intelligence necessarily, because there are plenty of good people who have changed their lives for the better in really extraordinary ways, who, are not conventionally that intelligent. And I don't mean this in a bad way or a smug way or anything, because what I'm saying is that is not the important thing. Just being conventionally intelligent in the sense of, like just being able to analyze things or compute things or memorize things or whatever nonsense you want to assign to intelligence, like the sort of things they'd measure on an IQ test. That kind of thing that's not what makes someone good. That's not what makes someone able to recognize when they've done something wrong and have the yearning to do better, to fix their lives, correct their mistakes, etc. That's not, it's much more about, do you have a desire to improve yourself? Do you have the desire? Can you admit that you made a terrible mistake, and can you move on from that? Do you have the humility to say, I messed up, it was my fault, it's my fault, I messed up? Do you have the humility to say that? Or, or is your pride going to get in the way, and are you going to, because I consider that my fatal flaw is pride. I consider that to be the thing that interferes with my life the most, is that I let my pride get in the way, and it screws me up. And I do my best to prevent that from happening, but I just don't always succeed, because we all have our flaws, and it's not necessarily something we can completely overcome. It's just something innate, and we just have to constantly struggle and constantly try to overcome as best as we can the weaknesses and the flaws that live within us, and we can never extinguish them, because they're part of who we are, but we can struggle against them, and we can do the very best that we can, as long as we're working sincerely towards that goal, as long as we have the humility and the honesty to admit that these are our failings and our flaws and our faults. And I think a lot of people who are celebrating Charlie Kirk's death, I think they are, I'm trying be diplomatic about it, and I'm trying not to be overly judgmental or anything. I'm trying not to, assign, the bad intentions per se. I think to these people, I think most of these people are probably just terribly mistaken, and they're not thinking about what they're really saying, and what they're really doing, and what they're really thinking. I think they're not being honest about it, and I think that's the problem. I think they are allowing their pride and their anger and all their other failings to make them short-sighted and make them unwilling to see the contradictions in their words and their actions. And because if you claim to be, a lot of these people would probably consider themselves, or even if not themselves as individuals, they would consider the political movement they belong to be the most ethical in the world, or at least, in the world today. They would probably consider their movement to be the most righteous, the most ethical, the most empathetic, the most compassionate, all of those good things. They probably, and those are good things, but if you don't embody those things, if you're advocating for the murder, if you celebrate the murder of someone who just said things that you don't like, all he did, he didn't do anything, he didn't hurt anyone, he didn't lay a hand on anyone, he didn't encourage anyone to do anything bad to anyone else. All he did was say things that these people did not like. All he did was say things that they didn't want to hear. All he did was question their beliefs. All he wanted to do was have a conversation with people who believed different things than himself. He just wanted to convince people of the validity of his beliefs, and he was completely willing to listen to their beliefs. And I think, I'm not saying he would have changed his beliefs necessarily if he had been, if someone had really just, if someone had really given a really convincing argument to counter his beliefs. I'm not saying he would have just switched and converted to a different way of thinking or anything. I think ideally that's what we should be aiming for. We should be willing to, no matter how strongly we believe something, I think we should be willing to, I'm not saying abandon our beliefs or be, I'm not saying be irresolute in our beliefs. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we should be prepared to change our perspective on things if we get convincing evidence that we are wrong. I think that's just part of being humble. I think we should just be willing to say, oh, yep, I was wrong. I was mistaken. You're right. If someone genuinely convinces you of something, like deep down, if you're having an argument with someone and they convince you of something, don't silence that inner voice that tells you you're wrong. Like be willing to admit, be willing to be honest about whether you're right or wrong. And what was I originally saying? So I don't think Charlie Kirk necessarily was perfectly, open-minded or anything. I think he first and foremost, he wanted to convince people of the validity of his beliefs. And realistically, that's what we all do, even if we ideally should be just trying to discover the truth of things, even if even if that is what we we know we should be doing, it's human nature to not want to do that. And just like the flaws, our inner flaws, our deepest flaws, just like that, there are flaws, there are flawed aspects of human nature that we just have to try to overcome as best as we can. And if we make a sincere effort, that's all we can really demand of ourselves in the end, is that we sincerely try our best. If we sincerely try our best, then I think we just have to accept that we're not going to perfectly succeed. But Charlie Kirk, all he did was just try to convince people of the validity of his beliefs. And he heard out people with different opinions than himself. I mean, that's pretty reasonable. Like, come on, that's in the grand scheme of things, in the whole scope of humanity, that is very reasonable. Like, all he did was just try to convince people through words, through civil debate, and he was willing to have them argue their case at him, and he was willing to listen. That's not evil. I don't care what he was arguing in favor of. I don't care whether you think what he was arguing in favor of, because you're entitled to believe that what someone argues for is evil or bad, or that is okay. Like, that is your prerogative. That is your prerogative. There are certainly things that I think people argue in favor of. I think those positions are terribly immoral, maybe even evil, depending on what it is. But so it's your prerogative to despise what someone else says. It's your prerogative to hate the words that someone says, and to be disgusted by them. But you don't have the right to wish or you don't have the right to seek death on someone just for presenting his or her beliefs. No matter how abhorrent you find those beliefs, if all that person is doing is just advocating for his or her own beliefs, then that, if you think that someone should not be allowed to do that, that's very, very, that's not ethical. That's morally unjustifiable. If you think that in any way, shape, or form, that justifies violence to silence someone who is saying things you don't like, no matter how bad you think they're, no matter how evil you think their position is, if you think that violence is justified in silencing them, then you're a bad person. Or, and I'm not saying bad overall. I'm saying bad in the sense of, like, that is a bad position to have. That's a bad belief to have. Like, that is wrong. It's a wrong belief. Like, it's a wrong sentiment. Not that you're a bad person, like, inherently or anything. I don't believe that, because as I've said, we all make terrible mistakes, and we all do worse things than that ultimately. But, and if anyone believes that murdering an innocent man whose only crime was speaking words that you don't like, that offend you, that disgust you, that enrage you, if you think that murdering someone for that reason is in any way, shape, or form justified, then you have no right to consider yourself the good person in that situation. You have no right to consider yourself morally superior to that person you hate. And it's kind of absurd, because I don't feel like this really should have to be articulated, because I think it is pretty obvious. I think this is just, I think the idea of having to actually articulate that this is pretty ridiculous, because it just seems so obvious on the face of it. Like, shouldn't people just figure this out on their own? But apparently not. Apparently, I do have to articulate it, and I'm lots of other people have articulated it as well. But I do feel the need to say it now, because I see a lot of people who really seem to believe themselves to be the morally superior party, but they do morally unjustifiable, morally reprehensible, or perhaps not do, but they support, they celebrate these morally unjustifiable things. And how, you lose any right to see yourself, let alone anyone else to see you as morally superior, or the good guys, or the heroes, or what, however you want to frame it. You lose any claim to that right if you think that murdering someone for speaking his mind and saying things that upset you, if you think that's justified, then you can't claim to be a good person, let alone morally superior in any way. You can't claim to be morally superior in any way. I think there's a deer over there. Maybe we'll see it. You can't claim to be morally superior in any way if you support the cold-blooded murder of someone just for saying things you don't like. If you think that was in any way justified, or he brought it on himself, or any nonsense like that, if you think that, then you're not like this guy who the accused assassin, the would-be assassin, the accused assassin. He no doubt thought himself the hero, and he thought he was doing the righteous thing, and he thought that he was, he thought he was justified in murder, because he thought he was, let's be honest, he thought his life was a movie. He thought real life is like a movie where, oh, this person is evil, and so I'm gonna go strike down evil. I'm the hero. Whatever I do is justified because just by virtue of me being the hero, right? Like I'm so good, I'm so righteous that even if it would be wrong to do this under normal circumstances, it's justified in this situation because my cause is so righteous. He probably thought he was like, he probably saw it in the same terms as, assassinating Adolf Hitler or something, which I mean isn't funny that he was that delusional, but it's funny in terms of how absurd it is. But I mean, that's it, because okay, think of it this way. If even if, and this is obviously not the case, like Charlie Kirk was not a Nazi. I mean, obviously that's not the case. Obviously that is a ludicrous exaggeration, and that's just how people like this justify, their abuse of other people. It's just calling someone a Nazi or a fascist is just a way to justify what would otherwise be unjustifiable. It's just a way of saying, hey, look, this person's so bad that, oh, it's okay. Yeah, just let me do whatever I want to them because, they're horrible, It's justified because you call them a name that's so bad that you hope people won't question it, and they'll just let you get away with whatever unethical, inappropriate, even inhuman stuff you want to. it's just a smokescreen in the end to justify, bullying, abuse, intimidation, murder, what have you. But anyway, so okay, let's say even, let's say, so Charlie Kirk's not a Nazi, wasn't a Nazi, but let's say that a better comparison. So let's say the assassin, and I mean, I don't claim to know what exactly was going on in his mind, but I think we can agree this is a reasonable conclusion to think that he thought he was, he was taking down an evil fascist Nazi. That was probably his thought process. I don't think that's unreasonable. I could be wrong. I don't know, but I think that was probably what he was thinking. That was probably his thought process. And okay. So he thought he was he probably thought this is like killing Hitler. He probably thought this is like assassinating Hitler to stop him from committing more crimes, from doing terrible things. The thing is that is a very stupid, flawed way of thinking about it, because it's not like assassinating Hitler, or assassinating Hitler, you would have to be assassinating, and I'm not saying this would be justified either, obviously, like going after anyone else in real life like this, no matter how terrible you think their actions are, what you think you're justified in doing. But killing Charlie Kirk is not in any way, shape, or form like killing Hitler, because all Charlie Kirk did was say things. All he did was just argue his positions. And, none of his positions were evil. I mean, you can absolutely disagree with them. I can absolutely see why some people would be very, very offended and disgusted by his beliefs and what he advocated. That's fair. I don't personally think that anything he said, as well, I should say, in fairness, as far as I have seen of him, because as I said at the beginning of the video, I said that I did not, I have only seen couple of his videos, since, was that the day before yesterday that he was assassinated? I've only seen a couple of his videos, and as far as I know, nothing he said was that I personally, I didn't find anything he said personally offensive. But, in fairness, I can see why some other people would. I can totally empathize why other people who are in different situations than myself, and I admit that, I could be wrong. I mean, maybe if I were in their position, maybe I would think the things he was saying were evil. It's entirely possible. I can definitely see that. But that's okay. We all have different beliefs and perspectives, and we're all we're all different people. We all have different lives. We all have very different life experiences and things we go through. Or we're all unique to one degree or another. But so this would be like a better comparison, rather than thinking of it like, oh, I'm killing Hitler, would be like thinking this would be prospective accused assassin. He was not killing Hitler, even if he thought of it in those terms. And and I'm not saying he was killing any Nazi, but if he was killing a Nazi, who a better comparison would be, who he was killing rather than Hitler, or any other of the German high command or anything. Who he was really killing was just some guy who happened to be a member of the Nazi party who just agitated for Nazi ideology, who just some guy who never lifted a finger to harm anyone else, never did anything. Because that's the thing, a lot of people have a hard time distinguishing actions and just words or thoughts. Like they think, oh, you think something, that's the same thing as an action, or you know, I mean, in the literal sense, like, yes, I mean, speaking is an action, but come on, we're talking about like affirmative actions. We're talking about like, you know, doing something, not just like proposing something, not just saying something, not just advocating for something. You know, I certainly don't think that people who advocate for things that I find reprehensible, I don't consider them like, I do not delude myself into thinking that that is them doing something. Like there are all manner of things that I would find, you know, like just as an example, and I'm not trying to, you know, not trying to rile anyone up, I'm not trying to offend anyone, but just as an example, you know, to kind of like put myself out there a little bit, and like something that I'm passionate about. People, if there was someone who, you know, who openly advocated for totally unrestricted abortions and you know, like advocated for, you know, like said there was nothing unethical about like an extremely late term abortion. If there was someone who advocated for that, who went on college campuses and debated people, and, you know, like that was his or her position, and, you know, and was like very firmly committed to that and advocated for it, and like, you know, and was saying these things, I would personally find that very reprehensible and immoral, and that would disgust me personally. But you know what? I cannot delude myself. Like, I won't give myself the leniency. I won't give myself the permission to delude myself into thinking that this person who I may vehemently disagree with, I might, like, this person might really disturb me and disgust me on a personal level, like, but all this person is doing is advocating for something that he or she believes in. And those are just words. You know, we all have the freedom to, it's a good thing that we all have the freedom to advocate for what we think is right. Even if, you know, no matter how terrible other people might find it, it's a good thing that we can all just, you know, it's a good thing that we can all advocate for what we believe in. I think, you know, it would be good if we were even more free, if none of us felt, you know, at all intimidated, at all afraid to speak out in a respectful, civilized manner. Of course, you know, I'm definitely not talking about just like screaming at each other or anything like that. More of just, you know, just like, I think if we just, it's actually the opposite of screaming at each other. I think if we could just discuss these things more calmly, even when they really upset us, even when these things, you know, even when they appall us, like even if it's, you know, like the most horrifying thing, like like advocating for late-term abortions is probably the thing that would horrify me the most, just personally. Like, that's probably the thing that would disgust me, like on a, you know, on a personal level, on an emotional level. That's the thing that would upset me the most. But I am perfectly willing to, you know, to hear someone else out on that subject, and, you know, I will try to keep an open mind. I will remain civil. I will, you know, I will, I want to just have a calm, civil conversation about these things. You know, I think even if it's unproductive in the end, I think that's the only way, or at least the best way that we have to try to make things better, is by just, you know, just trying to get to the bottom of these things, you know, like just like being very honest, you know, just letting it out in a civil way, airing what's in our hearts and trying to civilly convince each other of these things, like trying to, with accepting and accept, because that's the thing. That would be an important part of the civil discussion, is accepting that we're not gonna change each other's minds most of the time. Like going into a debate or an argument. I don't like the idea of debate per se. Argument is okay in the Platonic sense, but I would rather just, I don't like the idea of debate, because I think debate is like you're grandstanding and you're trying to win, you're trying to convince someone, like your opponent or the audience or whoever. You're trying to convince someone of your position first and foremost, rather than trying to just tell each other what you think in the hopes of reaching a consensus or a synthesis of your moral perspectives. Anyway, so I kind of go off on tangents sometimes, but that's just the way my thought process works. But so I would not give myself the permission, because it makes it easier for me, right? If I could tell myself that someone advocating for something I think is morally abhorrent, I could tell myself that that person, I could tell myself, if I wanted to go easy on myself, I could tell myself that is the same thing as, as actually doing the action that I think is wrong. I could do that, but that would be wrong. That would be weak of me. That would be letting myself off easily. That would be giving myself an easy way out, because I know better. I know better. I know that that's wrong. I know that just saying we should do something or shouldn't do something is not the same as actually taking any affirmative action, using your hands, using your power as a human being to just advocating for something is not the same as, I keep looking for ticks. I should have worn longer pants in this field, but it's fine. They're not really out right now. It's not the same as you advocating for something, arguing in favor of something, is not the same as doing something. No, it's just suggesting something. Just suggesting something, I know, like, there are certain, legal contexts where, if you encourage people to do things, and that can be held against you, and it can, that's certainly. But I'm talking about outside of those contexts, and just in a broader ethical and moral sense. And so, this assassin probably thought he was killing Hitler, but at best, even if we take his worldview, at a fair estimation, and even if we accept his worldview, which I'm not saying we should, but just for the purposes of discussion, let's say he was right. Let's say that what Charlie Kirk advocated for and represented was so abhorrent that that he was the equivalent of a Nazi, or whoever you think is the most evil group in history. But even if that were the case, this assassin did not kill Hitler. He didn't even kill Goebbels. He just killed some guy, some minor agent in the in the propaganda ministry or something. Like, at best. Just some guy who advocated for his movement, for what he genuinely believed to be right, and whether or not you think what he advocated for was evil or not, it doesn't justify cold-blooded murder. If you went back in time and you found just some low-level, hopefully this isn't too controversial. I don't think it should be, but if you went back in time and you found just some like lower mid-level, member of the Nazi Party who never did anything. Like, this isn't someone who murdered anyone. This isn't someone who, this isn't even anyone who fought in the here or anything. This isn't anyone who took up arms for any evil regime. This isn't a combatant in any sense. If you think that just taking a rifle and assassinating him from a safe distance, just to silence him, if you think that's justified, if you think that's a justified escalation of the use of force in response to someone spouting propaganda that you think is evil, like, if you think that justifies cold-blooded murder, taking a human being's life, then that's wrong. That's not, I'm not afraid to say that. I'm not afraid to say that no matter how much you disagree with someone else's words, it does not justify cold-blooded murder. It's weird because I don't feel like this, I don't feel like this is a controversial position. I think this is pretty reasonable, and honestly, I think this is the way. This didn't used to be a controversial opinion at all. People have just gone a little insane for a while now, and it just doesn't it's not a justified escalation of force. No matter how terrible you think the things someone else is saying. Because, really think about it. There are people who, glorify serial killers and have cults to, build cults around them and stuff. And, I don't know, do you think I don't know if anyone even remembers this these days, but if you know who, Charles Manson is, all the members of his cult, his family, say there was one who didn't, this is just some lunatic who idolized Charles Manson and worshiped the ground he walked on. And this is just, in this hypothetical, this is just some demented pervert who, to put it bluntly, who worshiped Charles Manson and and advocated for Charles Manson and said he was a genius or he was the Messiah. I think that's what he claimed to. I don't remember exactly what his belief system was, but I think he claimed to be the Messiah, something like that. But anyway, someone who idolized Charles Manson, or someone today on the internet who says that what if someone said, oh, Ted Bundy was totally justified in everything he did. I wish he was still around. I wish he was still at large, killing innocent people, oh, it's awesome that he did that. That would be a horrible, demented thing to say, wouldn't it? That would be sick, I think almost everyone on earth would agree that that's not okay to, that's not that's a bad thing to say. These are bad things to advocate for. Saying you wish Ted Bundy is running around killing people, that's bad, that's indefensible. You could say that that's an evil thing to say, that'd be fair. I would agree with that. But then consider someone like that who's saying these horrible things, or just unrepentantly. Does that justify murdering that person? And I would say no. I would say no matter how repellent the things someone says and the things someone advocates for and, believes and propagates, no matter how sick and demented and evil the words that someone says are, we personally feel them to be, it doesn't justify cold-blooded murder. It doesn't justify hunting that person and murdering that person. I mean, it doesn't even justify, just like intimidation through violence or anything. I don't think it. But let alone cold-blooded murder, like premeditated, cold-blooded, just heartless murder, just because you don't like what someone says. It's not justified. It's not justified no matter how horrible the things someone says are. Because like I said, that was my point, is that think about it. There are probably millions of people on Earth who are saying horrible things. Like, think about all the people all over the world. Like, let's just put aside politics. Let's think about like all the people all over the earth who are saying outlandishly evil stuff. Like they're people who worship serial killers, any variety of like a pervert out there who thinks like I don't know if YouTube will YouTube censor me if how explicit can I be about like what I'm thinking of without YouTube having an issue with that? I don't know. So I'm just going to try to, I'm not going to say like, but like think of all the perverts out there who are into perverted stuff, who like the kind of stuff that like 99% of the population would agree is just, evil, that kind of thing. Like you probably know what I'm thinking about. But, there are a lot of people who advocate for like horrible stuff in regards to that. Like, I don't know, lowering the age of consent and, twisted, sick stuff that, like, I think the vast majority of us would just unreservedly say are evil, but does that justify murdering these people, like hunting them down and murdering them? I mean, I'm sure some people would say yes, I'm sure some people would say yes, but then there you go. I mean, that's kind of evil too, isn't it? Like the people who would say, yeah, I think we should just hunt these people down. That's kind of, I would consider that a little evil, or bad anyway. I mean, evil's a funny thing. I mean, in terms of like, well, how far does it have to go to be considered evil? I think I have a like decently high bar for, or low bar, I guess, actually, low bar, in the moral gradient. Like, I think I have a pretty low bar in terms of what I consider evil. Like, I think for me to like genuinely consider you evil, I think something has to be pretty bad. I think someone has to be like really, really, really twisted. Like do really, or like advocate for really horrible stuff. But I don't think just someone having evil thoughts or saying evil things justifies killing them. Maybe on some level, like, I think the really evil people in the world, like maybe on some weak level inside me, I kind of want that, but I don't. I know that's wrong. I know that I'm the one. I'm being evil by doing that. And so if I'm being evil by wishing to, disproportionately punish evil. That's the thing, disproportionately, because I do think punishing evil actions, not words, but actions, I do think punishing evil actions is important, but not disproportionately, not just like what might make us feel good in the moment, but, but yeah, so that's actually kind of what I'm trying to say. Like, what I've been talking about for, almost 90 minutes now is, maybe this is a, more succinct way of saying it, but if I may want to kill people on some just like reactive, deep level who I consider evil, but I know that is wrong of me to have to not, I mean, not wrong to have the thought. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it would be wrong to like think of that as being a genuinely good thing. Like, I should chastise, and I do chastise myself, like, I chastise myself because I know that's wrong. I know that that's just, like, it's my knee-jerk reaction. That's like, it's just, that's me being repelled by something and thinking, like that's horrible, and having just like a selfish, kind of cruel, kind of cruel, like, reaction to it. Kind of a cruel, like, judgment, I guess, or a cruel response, a cruel, short-sighted thought process about it. But I know that it's wrong. I know that it would be wrong to think that way. Like, I know it's wrong to I know it's wrong to think that way and not kind of realize that it's not justified. Not like, because it's not justified. Even if I think someone is evil for saying something or thinking something or doing something, I don't think people are evil. I don't think anyone's evil for thinking things. I think if we advocate for some things that can be evil in extreme cases, but I think you have to be, like, consciously advocating for something. But even though that is, even though there are things that people consciously advocate for that I think are evil, I know that it would be totally unjustifiable to wish harm, to consciously wish harm on anyone for that reason, no matter how horrible or evil or repellent or disturbing or disgusting I might think their position is, that their cause is, whatever they're advocating for. Like, I may hate it, I may hate what they what they say, I may hate the words they say, but, and to be honest, on some level, I might hate the person. Like, I mean, we all hate. I don't think it's healthy to lie and say that we don't feel hatred, because we all do. And hatred is a natural thing. It's what we do with the hatred. It's what we do with our darker feelings that matters. It's how we manage those, the darker side of our nature. It's how we manage ourselves. Because we all have the capacity for good. We all have the capacity for evil. And the only way we can really exemplify the good is to come to terms with our evil and manage it in a way that doesn't get anyone else hurt. Or ideally doesn't get us hurt either. But well, maybe that's not something we can always accomplish in every sense, But it would be wrong of me to wish harm on anyone who, no matter how evil I consider their words, it would be wrong of me to wish harm on them. Because we have to be able to talk to each other. Just saying something, just advocating for something, just sharing our beliefs and our ideas and our opinions is never, ever, no matter how terrible those opinions or ideas or beliefs might be, no matter how terrible they are, no matter how evil they are, that is never cause to harm anyone else. It is never cause to try to silence anyone else. It is never cause to murder anyone else. Because if you murder someone for saying something that you don't like, you are the bad person. You are the villain. You are the evil one doing something evil. You're the one performing the evil affirmative action. You're the one actually taking action to do something evil, which is cold-blooded murder of an innocent. Cold-blooded murder of someone just because you don't like what he says. Whoever murdered Charlie Kirk is the villain. Whoever murdered Charlie Kirk is the evil party. Whoever murdered him is the evil one who did something wrong. Charlie Kirk didn't do anything wrong. Even if you hate him, even if you hate what he says or said, it doesn't justify taking his life. It doesn't justify harming him at all. It's just words. We have to be able to talk to each other, or else how are we going to learn anything from each other? How are we going to improve anything if we're afraid to talk to each other? If we're afraid to be honest? If we're afraid to be honest, how are we going to express anything of consequence? I mean, the things of consequence that we really deeply believe in are often shocking. The things it's going to offend someone. The things that we really believe, the things that we're really passionate about, other people are usually just as passionate about things in the other direction. And so how are we going to, if we're afraid to talk to each other? And I'm not saying we should like obnoxiously broadcast our thoughts at each other like all the time or anything in inappropriate situations, or like we shouldn't just be like arguing about politics or morality or anything, just like in our day-to-day lives. That's not good. But in the appropriate settings, when it's a good thing, when it might, perhaps, when both parties want it, when it might yield something productive, when some good might come out of it, then yeah, I think we have to be calm and collected, and we have to just open up to each other, and we have to control our reactions to things. We have to be in control of our emotions and our thoughts, and we have to just be willing to hear each other out. And even if we really don't like the things that we say, that the other person says, even if they make us want to throw up, like we just have to force ourselves to listen. We just have to force ourselves to keep a level head and try to keep an open mind as best as we can, and and try to present our beliefs as best as we can, and maybe because ideally the result of that is that we come to a better understanding of each other, our opposing viewpoints. Like often there's a lot of overlap, and we realize that like maybe we don't really oppose each other as much. I'm not saying because like we probably do oppose each other. We probably have different beliefs. We probably have different stances on things, but we may not oppose each other as much as we think. Like if we see someone saying something that we really don't like, I think often we kind of jump to conclusions, and we make assumptions about like how we infer a lot of stuff about what someone else thinks. Like we don't always like realize it, but we infer a lot that isn't necessarily there. Like someone who I know disagrees with me on something that I'm passionate about, I might, without realizing it necessarily, like I try to be aware of this, but I might jump to conclusions, and I might think that this other person is way more extreme than I think, like with the abortion example. Like I might think that someone else, I might just kind of without meaning to, without like being aware of it necessarily, I might just jump to, like, knowing someone supports something that I don't, I might jump to kind of a foregone conclusion and, like, I think that was a nap. And I might make assumptions that are not based in reality. I might like wrongly assume someone else's motives just because we're on opposite sides of something that we're both passionate about. Like, I might wrongly assume that someone else maybe disagrees with me more than I really think. Like, maybe this other person has perfectly legitimate reasons for disagreeing with me, and, like, I might think, I might have just, like, the knee-jerk reaction of, oh, this person is just being cruel, this person is just being heartless, or whatever, But then if I actually ask this person and actually hear them out, it's entirely possible, and not always the case, but sometimes it turns out that, like, what I just assumed to be callousness, a lack of compassion, it may be a surprisingly well-reasoned, much more moderate position than what I assumed. Because I don't, unless I really, like, try to get to the bottom of something and really try to ask someone else about these things, then I don't know. I can't know, and my mind is going to fill in the blanks. That's just how human beings function. We just, our minds fill in the blanks so that we can operate, because if we don't have enough information to go off of, whether or not we consciously want this to happen, we just, our minds fill in the blanks, and then if we're not aware of it, if we're not kind of on top of our emotions and our instincts and our kind of more basal responses to things, if we're not aware of these things, then we can make mistakes. Because our minds are just going to, we might not be trying to do it, we might be actively trying not to do it, but our minds are just going to fill in the blanks. And, that can lead to a fight or flight response. That can lead to